Hi, it's me again, and I want to share the story about how I met my biological father. So I want to start from the beginning of my life, give a little background. I was born to a single mother. She had never lived on her own and was somewhat dependent on her mother. She married her husband when I was 4 months old. Looking back, I don't think she married him out of love. She married him as a way to gain some independence from her mom. She had never lived on her own, and so she saw this as an opportunity to become an independent person. And this is information that I've come to realize as I've gotten older. But he adopted me when I wasn't even 2 years old. They had a child together when I was 18 months old. I don't have a relationship with that child for a very good reason. It's a boy. So anyway, I always thought he was my dad until one day, I was about 8 or 9, probably 9, my mother sat me down and said she needed to talk to me. And I remember that day, we were outside, and she started to tell me that my dad was not my real dad. And I was confused. I mean, I was just a child. And so she started to explain that she wasn't married when I was born. And I remember pretending like I was upset to find out that that man was not my real dad. Because I didn't want her to know that secretly inside I was happy that he was not my dad. He was not a good man. I was fearful of him, and my fear was getting worse. In fact, looking back, I believe that some of my anxieties started around that time. So anyway, I asked her questions. I said, well, who is he? Where does he live? And, do I have a brother or sister or a grandmother, another grandmother? And she, looking back, she made up information. She gave me a name and told me the story about how I might be confused with another guy, but how she wanted to marry him and his mom didn't like her or something. I don't know. But anyway, she made up some stories and we went on. But as I got older, and I knew I was different, Marvin treated me different from his son. He was very abusive. And then I started being reminded that I was not his. And I started asking my mother questions like, who is he? She finally started telling me that she didn't know who my father was. And, she said she was wild. It could be several different possibilities. But I couldn't believe her because in my mind, she had to have some clue, even if there was different possibilities. She had to remember who she slept with. And I even asked my grandmother. She said she didn't know because she had asked my mother when she found out she was pregnant. Mother wouldn't tell her anything. And I asked about my birth certificate. Is he on my birth certificate? No. I couldn't get a copy of my original birth certificate. I still don't, because Florida has sealed records. So the only birth certificate I have shows my mother's husband as my father. So anyway, as time went on, that sense of loss just was there. It would not go away, and it just kept getting stronger. Like, who am I? Do I have a sister that I've always dreamed of? Do I have another grandmother that would love me? Do I have an aunt that I could do fun things with? I mean, I started imagining a more, picturesque life. And, my mother started becoming more defensive about it. She would tell me, or ask me, why do you need to know? Why can't you just drop it? Why do you, she kept telling me, she pretty much just want me to forget about it and move on. But until you're in somebody's shoes like myself, when you're a mystery, where'd you come from? You know, it's people, my mother wouldn't understand. She knows where she came from. So she knew both of her parents, even though her father wasn't in her life. At least she knew who he was. So anyway, probably about 14, 15 years ago, I did a 23andMe test. And I got my matches back. They were all distant matches. And they looked like they were all maternal matches. And I kept checking over time, and I wasn't getting anything close. And finally found a page on Facebook having to do with ancestry. I think it was DNA Detectives. And I posted on there asking, if there was some way that I could figure out my paternal side from the distant matches that were on there, even though I didn't really see any paternal matches. And several people suggested the ancestry test. So that's what I did. And I got my results a little over 8 years ago. My first match was my mother. She never told me she did the test, and I didn't say anything to her. Nothing was ever said by her or myself. I'm sure she saw that I was on there, though. And then my next match was a cousin. And when I looked at his match and compared it to my mother and some of the other maternal matches, he did not match my maternal side at all. And so I knew he had to be a paternal cousin. And at the time I got my results, it was around Christmas. We were in Florida visiting family. And so I sent him a message. Turns out he lived in Tampa. So we got to meet the next day. And we started talking. And he was adopted and had no information about his parents at the time. He didn't know he was adopted until after both of his parents had passed away, adopted parents. So, but he was telling me that he had some matches and he wasn't sure how he was related to them. So after some time, he let me look at his matches, and I could see that his top match was an uncle. And then there were a bunch of cousins, and one of them I contacted her, and she and I even talked on the phone. We were able to narrow down who one of his parents could be. So this cousin's father was the youngest of 8 kids, or 5 boys and 3 girls, and matching all the cousins that were matching Tom and her to the parents, we were able to narrow down to 2 brothers. And so that meant that his mother was the sister to my biological father. So that was 8 years. That was about 7 years ago is when this cousin and I were able to determine this information. So anyway, as time went on, I kept checking matches, and almost 4 years ago, I got 2 more matches that were pretty close. It was a paternal aunt and another cousin. And it looked like that they were mother and son. So I looked at Tom's matches and realized that was his mother and his half-brother. So I messaged her. And I didn't say anything about Tom because I didn't, I just wanted to keep it neutral. And just said, hey, I think, we're related. I saw your matches on Ancestry. And she responded right away. And I was planning a trip to Florida anyway a couple months later, and I got to meet her personally, talk, and she told me she had 2 full brothers, an older half brother, but we don't know where he's at. But she was talking about her brothers, and she said they're very different from each other. And she said, so finally I said, well, one of those brothers must be my biological father. You're my aunt. And she says, well, it has to be George because he was the wild one. The other brother was the more upstanding citizen and wouldn't do that. So this was May of 2022. So fast forward a few months, and she and I texted occasionally, and we talked on the phone occasionally. And I didn't say anything about Tom because I didn't know what the situation was. But I would drop hints, like, have you contacted Tom? Because she wasn't responding. She did not respond to his messages because he had messaged her. There's a story about that I'm going to tell in the future. So anyway, in August, she texted me. She said, George would like to talk to you. And she gave me his phone number. I was like, oh my gosh, really? So I had to wait a day because I was nervous. I wasn't sure what to expect. And so I called the next day, and he and I talked, and he told me he never planned to have his own children, but that he thought I deserved answers. And that he would do the test, and I offered to buy the test for him. He says, no, I can do it. So I was like, okay. I didn't expect him, really, because, people will say they'll do something, they won't do it. But that following November, I opened up my account, and there he is, parent-child. George was my father. So I called him, left a message. Turns out he was in the hospital. He called me the next day. We talked. And he said, yeah, he was astounded to learn that he has a daughter. Not only does he have me, but he has another daughter. I was like, what? Wait, I don't have a half-sibling match. And I said, who is it? He told me who it was. It shows up as initials and some numbers on ancestry. And I said, she shows up as a cousin for me based on the centimorgan numbers. And I said, how many centimorgans do you match with her? And he told me. And he was definitely her father. So, which means that she is my half-sister, but for whatever reason, her centimorgans that we match with is in the outlier that is rare, I guess, to match that low as a half-sibling. And I have tried contacting her, have not had success. And so anyway, I called George, after I called George and we talked some more, and he was very receptive. He said, well, I would like to meet you before it's too late. He had been having some health issues for a few years. And I said, well, I'm planning on driving to Florida for Christmas, so we will make a detour your way and visit you, meet you. So the kids and I, the week before Christmas, drove down there to Panacea, Florida. We spent 3 days with George, and it was just, it still feels like a dream sometimes. Just to get answers, like that puzzle was solved. Number one. Number two, it answers some questions about some of the different features that I have that didn't match my maternal side. And my son, his features, he was looking less and less like his father. Some of the features they had didn't even match me, and that was kind of interesting to see as he went through puberty and some of the changes that were taking place. But as soon as we saw George, I'm like, wow, the resemblance is uncanny. So anyway, it was really nice to spend those couple 3 days with him and get to know him. And he did share, how, a little bit about his life, and he lived a bit of a wild life. I showed him my mother's picture. He did not recognize her. And months later, I showed Mother his picture, and she didn't recognize him. But, George explained to me that, he frequented the bars, and so did my mother. So I came to the conclusion that I was likely the product of a one-night stand. The kids and I found George endearing, as different as he was from us, his lifestyle and everything. And we kept in touch somewhat that following year. And we saw him one more time a year later. And this time, my kid's dad got to meet him too. And that was the last time I saw him and talked to him. I would try to call him, I would text him, and I was not getting responses. And it turns out that he'd been having a lot of health issues. And even his sister, he wasn't even responding to my Aunt Ginger. And I found out Aunt Ginger called me beginning of March last year to let me know that George had died. And I looked up his obituary. He died on my birthday.